The ancient marriage of pain and creation. Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has carried with it an unspoken truth that the deepest forms of beauty arise not in moments of ease, but in moments of fracture. In the ancient world, this truth was not hidden. It was ritualized, celebrated, and even sanctified. The Greeks, perhaps more than any other people, understood this strange bond between agony and artistry. They gave the world the concept of tragedy, a form of storytelling that revolved not around victory or comfort, but around the inevitability of suffering. In the words of Aristotle, tragedy existed to produce catharsis, a purging, a cleansing of the soul through the shared recognition of pain. Audiences gathered in amphitheaters not to escape hardship, but to immerse themselves in it. Kings fell, heroes were crushed, lovers were torn apart, and through this spectacle, the people found meaning. They understood that the truth of the human condition was not ease, but loss, and it was precisely in that confrontation with suffering that art reached its highest form. Their myths carried the same lesson. Prometheus defied the gods to bring fire to humanity, and his punishment was eternal torment. Yet from his pain came the gift of progress, knowledge, and culture itself. Orpheus descended into the underworld for love, and though he failed to rescue Eurydice, his story became one of the most enduring myths in Western imagination. The Greeks believed that art was not simply inspired by joy, but carved out of wounds. Every myth bore the mark of sacrifice, a reminder that creation and destruction were inseparable twins. This pattern was not confined to Greece. Across ancient civilizations, suffering was woven into the fabric of meaning-making. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from the grief of its hero as he faced the death of his closest companion. In the rituals of early religions, human sacrifice itself became a symbolic act, the spilling of blood to sustain the gods, the offering of life to secure divine favor. Pain was never wasted. It was transmuted into sacred story. Even the most primal forms of art reveal this connection. The earliest cave paintings were not idle decoration. They were born in the darkness of caves, places of danger, silence, and fear. These images were prayers scratched against the void, attempts to turn uncertainty, mortality, and terror into something visible, something that could be held and understood. The act of painting was not entertainment. It was survival through symbolism. What is revealed in these ancient echoes is unsettling yet profound. Humanity did not simply endure suffering. It shaped it, ritualized it, and gave it form. Pain was never incidental to creation. It was the wellspring from which creation flowed. The Greeks may have given it the name catharsis, but the truth is far older. To be human has always meant to transform wounds into words, agony into art, and despair into myth. From our earliest stories to our grandest temples, every masterpiece was born not from comfort, but from the shadow of suffering, the tortured genius archetype. If ancient civilizations saw suffering as the seed of collective meaning, history later revealed an even more haunting pattern: the solitary figure whose personal torment becomes the raw material for timeless genius. These are the names etched into our memory, not because they lived comfortably, but because they suffered extraordinarily, and in that crucible created something eternal. Consider Vincent van Gogh, a man consumed by loneliness, mental illness, and poverty. During his lifetime, He sold almost nothing. He lived in obscurity, ridiculed by society, rejected by love, plagued by despair so deep that he cut off his own ear in a moment of madness. Yet out of this inner storm came Starry Night, The Night Cafe, Sunflowers, works that now command billions in cultural value. His agony became his palette, his despair, the very pigment of immortality. The man died convinced he was a failure. The world decided otherwise. Beethoven presents another chapter in this strange biography of pain. As one of the greatest composers in history, his music embodies triumph, passion, and transcendence. Yet behind those symphonies was a man losing the very sense most essential to his art, his hearing. Imagine the torment of a musician who could no longer hear his own notes, yet in the silence of his deafness, Beethoven composed works that would outlive empires. His Ninth Symphony, written when he was almost completely deaf, stands as a paradox, beauty carved from the silence of despair. Or think of Fyodor Dostoevsky, condemned to death for his political beliefs. He stood before a firing squad, seconds away from execution, only to be spared at the last moment. That brush with death scarred him, but it also gave birth to some of the most profound explorations of the human soul ever written. His novels, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, Notes from Underground, were not the writings of a comfortable man. They were the cries of someone who had stared into the abyss and returned to tell the tale. And then there is Nikola Tesla, a mind that dreamed the future, yet lived in poverty, solitude, and obsession. He died in a hotel room, penniless and forgotten, while the world feasted on the inventions his suffering helped produce. His brilliance was inseparable from his torment. These figures form a recurring archetype, the tortured genius. But the question remains, why? Why does suffering sharpen the mind and enrich the spirit? Why do wounds become windows into the eternal? Psychologists suggest that pain collapses illusions. When the world turns hostile, when life shatters certainty, the mind is forced inward into the depths of perception and imagination. Suffering becomes the chisel that sculpts raw emotion into universal truth. The tortured genius is not a myth. It is a pattern. Again and again, history whispers the same truth. Masterpieces are not produced in the glow of satisfaction, but in the fire of despair. And perhaps what we admire most in these figures is not only their art, but their ability to transmute agony into a gift for all of humanity. The psychological mechanics of pain. If history shows us that suffering has always been the companion of genius, psychology and neuroscience reveal why. Pain, far from being an obstacle to creativity, activates forces in the human mind that can transform despair into vision. The mechanics of suffering are not random. They are the very architecture through which masterpieces are forged. Neuroscientists have found that emotional pain triggers the same brain regions responsible for memory, empathy, and imagination. When grief strikes, when despair seizes the mind, the brain does not simply shut down. It works harder, searching for patterns, connections, and meaning. In other words, pain forces the mind into a deeper state of reflection. Unlike pleasure, which often ends in satisfaction, suffering creates a question. It lingers, it demands resolution, it insists on being given shape, and often that shape is art. Psychologists speak of what they call post-traumatic growth. While trauma can destroy, it can also remake. Individuals who endure deep suffering often report an expanded sense of perspective, heightened resilience, and a reorientation toward meaning. Pain strips away illusions of permanence. It confronts us with mortality, with limitation, with failure, and in that confrontation the creative mind finds fuel. It becomes obsessed with reconstructing what has been broken, with turning chaos into form. The wound does not silence, it demands expression. This is why periods of suffering so often lead to breakthroughs. The poet in grief writes verses that echo across centuries. The composer in despair discovers harmonies no one else could imagine. The philosopher crushed by alienation births ideas that shift civilizations. It is not that pain itself is beautiful. Pain is cruel, merciless, often unbearable. But in the alchemy of the human spirit, it becomes raw material, dark ore, refined into brilliance. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." But perhaps more accurately, what does not kill us makes us more creative. Suffering exposes us to realities that comfort would never reveal. It dismantles the ordinary, forcing the imagination to search for new pathways. When the old world collapses, the mind must build another. Out of necessity, out of survival comes invention, yet this process is not automatic. Many are crushed under the weight of suffering, their creativity extinguished. The difference lies in whether pain is endured passively or confronted and transmuted. The genius does not escape suffering. The genius wrestles with it, wrests from it fragments of truth, and crafts them into form. In that act of transformation, pain becomes more than agony. It becomes revelation. The mechanics of suffering then reveal a paradox. Pain wounds us, but it also awakens us. It shatters the illusion of comfort, but in the shards, it reveals patterns hidden from the satisfied eye. And this is why every masterpiece, whether a painting, a poem, or a symphony, carries with it the fingerprint of pain, not as a curse, but as the silent engine that drives creation itself. Society's exploitation of pain. If pain is the hidden engine of creation, then society has learned to harvest it. History is filled with examples not only of suffering birthing masterpieces, but of those masterpieces being taken, commodified, and consumed by a world that often ignored or destroyed their creators. Pain does not simply fuel art. It becomes a resource, one that culture exploits, sometimes mercilessly. Consider the story of Vincent van Gogh again. During his lifetime, society left him to rot in obscurity. He was poor, dismissed as unstable, and died by his own hand, convinced of his worthlessness. Yet today his canvases are valued in the hundreds of millions. His despair, which once brought him nothing but loneliness, has been repackaged into the language of prestige and profit. It was not the man the world celebrated, but the myth of his suffering, turned into currency. This pattern repeats endlessly. Sylvia Plath's struggles with depression were ignored when she lived. Her breakdowns were seen as weakness, as instability. But after her suicide, her words became canon, studied, dissected, immortalized. The publishing industry that once rejected her now thrives on her name. Pain, once unbearable and isolating, is retroactively crowned as genius, but only once the artist is safely gone. The music industry has perfected this exploitation. How many young stars, burning with talent and anguish, are celebrated precisely because their torment feels authentic. The tragedy of Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, or countless others is that their suffering sold records. Their fragility was marketed as brilliance, their downward spirals romanticized as the cost of authenticity. The machine profits while the human being disintegrates. Even history itself plays the same game. Martyrs, dissidents, revolutionaries, those who suffered exile, prison, or death are rarely honored in their own lifetimes. They are silenced, crushed, or erased. Yet centuries later, societies resurrect them as symbols, as icons of resilience, as convenient emblems of a struggle long past. Their suffering becomes a narrative commodity, stripped of its messy reality, repackaged for national pride or political rhetoric. This raises an uncomfortable question. Do we subconsciously demand suffering from our artists, thinkers, and visionaries in order to accept their work as authentic? A happy Van Gogh might never have painted Starry Night. A comfortable Dostoevsky might never have written Crime and Punishment. Does society, in its hunger for masterpieces, become complicit in demanding pain as the price of beauty? The truth is unsettling. We celebrate the art, but ignore the agony that made it possible. We elevate the product, but discard the person. In this way, pain becomes not only the origin of creation, but also the currency of culture, and society, knowingly or not, feeds on it. Modern alienation and the digital stage. If the ancient world ritualized pain and past centuries romanticized the tortured genius, then our modern era has found a new theater for suffering, the digital stage. Here, pain is no longer confined to canvases or symphonies. It is streamed, shared, and performed across screens, consumed in fragments, and judged by algorithms. The cycle of creation through suffering has not ended, it has only mutated. Modern life is paradoxical. We live in an age of unprecedented convenience, surrounded by comforts our ancestors could not have imagined. And yet beneath this abundance, a strange emptiness grows. Loneliness, depression, and anxiety rise even as material needs are met. People feel isolated in crowded cities, disconnected in a hyper-connected world. The irony is painful. In escaping ancient hardships, we have built a new architecture of alienation. This alienation itself becomes fertile ground for art. Entire musical movements, punk, grunge, hip-hop, emerged from the frustration and despair of disillusioned generations. The angry chords of punk were born from political stagnation and unemployment. Grunge carried the voice of youth crushed by suburban emptiness. Hip-hop arose from systemic oppression, poverty, and urban struggle. Each genre was less about entertainment than survival, an outlet for pain that had nowhere else to go. But in the digital age, suffering has been fragmented. Platforms like YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok amplify personal despair into consumable sound bites. The internet rewards vulnerability, but only when it is packaged in ways that grab attention. Depression becomes aesthetic. Loneliness becomes a relatable caption. Trauma becomes a trend. Pain, once transmuted into epic poetry or symphonies, is now condensed into 30-second clips, rapid, disposable, and monetized. At the same time, the algorithms thrive on it. Outrage spreads faster than peace. Sad confessions, breakdowns, and controversial admissions travel further than quiet reflections. In this way, modern alienation is not only felt but also harvested, feeding the endless appetite of digital platforms. Pain has become data, optimized for clicks, and yet, even in this commodified space, masterpieces still emerge. Independent musicians crafting haunting tracks in their bedrooms, viral poets turning heartbreak into verses that reach millions, filmmakers and writers sharing raw stories with audiences they could never have reached in earlier centuries. The digital stage may cheapen suffering through overexposure, but it also democratizes it. What once required publishers, patrons, or royal courts now requires only a connection and a voice. Still, the question remains: are we truly listening, or merely consuming? Are we honoring suffering or turning it into entertainment? Modern alienation ensures that the cycle of pain and creation continues. But in a world where attention is the ultimate currency, the masterpieces of today may flicker and vanish before they ever have the chance to echo across time. Pain has not left us, it has only changed form. And in the age of screens, it is no longer hidden in canvases or symphonies. It stares back at us through pixels, demanding the same ancient question: what will we create from it? The paradox of comfort. Why no masterpiece is born from pleasure? If suffering is the soil in which masterpieces grow, then what of comfort? What of those moments in history when societies, bathed in prosperity and ease, sought to create? The uncomfortable truth is that comfort rarely produces greatness. Comfort nurtures stability, but it dulls urgency. It entertains, but it rarely transforms. Periods of artistic and philosophical flourishing almost always emerge from turmoil. The Renaissance, often remembered as an age of beauty, was born from the Black Death's devastation. Millions perished, and in that darkness, questions of mortality and meaning ignited a rebirth of art and science. Dostoevsky's Russia was plagued with poverty, oppression, and despair, yet it gave rise to literature that still haunts the human imagination. Jazz was born from the trauma of slavery, oppression, and exile. Time and again, the equation repeats. Catastrophe produces culture. Contrast this with eras of prolonged comfort. Empires at their peak often produce little more than decadence. Luxury, yes, but rarely lasting art. Rome's grandeur was not its period of greatest creativity. Its masterpieces emerged in the tension between conquest and collapse. Modern suburbia, with its neatly trimmed lawns and predictable routines, has not produced a Shakespeare or a Beethoven. Stability offers many gifts, but transcendence is seldom among them. Philosophers have long wrestled with this paradox. Schopenhauer argued that life itself was defined by suffering, and that happiness was merely the temporary absence of pain. Kierkegaard claimed that despair was not an accident but a condition of existence, and that true selfhood could only be forged through confronting it. Nietzsche, perhaps most radically, declared that suffering was not only unavoidable but necessary for greatness. To live without pain, he suggested, was to live without depth. The logic is ruthless. Pleasure fulfills, but it does not push. Comfort satisfies, but it does not demand. Pain, by contrast, unsettles. It strips away illusions, confronts us with our limits, and forces us to search for meaning beyond ourselves. A comfortable person has little reason to dig into the depths of existence. A suffering person has no choice. This is why no masterpiece is born from pleasure. Pleasure produces adornment, luxury, distraction. Pain produces transformation. And in art, transformation is the only currency that endures. Comfort, then, may be desirable in daily life, but it is sterile as a birthplace of creation. If we look honestly at history, we find that every great leap forward, every timeless work, every profound philosophy has emerged not from the warm glow of contentment, but from the cold shadow of suffering. Transcendence, turning wounds into worlds. If every masterpiece is born from pain, then the final question is this: what separates those who are crushed by suffering from those who transform it into beauty? For pain alone does not guarantee greatness. Many live and die within its grip, their voices silenced, their potential buried. The difference lies not in the existence of wounds, but in the alchemy of transcendence, the rare ability to take agony and shape it into something that outlives the sufferer. Consider Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Auschwitz, surrounded by death, starvation, and dehumanization. He endured horrors few can imagine, yet from that abyss, he emerged with one of the most profound works of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning. In it, Frankl argued that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, man retains one freedom, the power to choose his response. His wounds became the foundation of a philosophy of hope. Think also of Frida Kahlo, whose body was shattered by a bus accident that left her in lifelong pain. Bedridden for months, often in agony, she turned her suffering into canvases that still burn with raw honesty. Her self-portraits are not celebrations of beauty in the conventional sense. They are confrontations with pain, physical and emotional, transformed into color and form. She did not conceal her wounds, she painted them for the world to see, and in doing so gave them a strange kind of immortality. Music, too, reveals this transcendence. Heartbreak has given rise to symphonies and anthems that resonate across generations. The blues, born out of oppression and sorrow, became one of the most powerful artistic languages of resilience. The very act of singing pain aloud gave dignity to those whose lives had been stripped of it. In transforming their wounds into sound, they reclaimed what the world had denied them: meaning, expression, and humanity. This is the essence of transcendence. Pain itself is destructive, but when confronted, wrestled with, and reshaped, it becomes a raw material of greatness. The genius does not escape suffering, no one does. The genius transforms it. Where most of us see only scars, they see patterns. Where most collapse under despair, they build monuments out of it. But this power is not limited to the few we call artists or geniuses. It is, in fact, the fundamental human gift. To endure is one thing, to transform is another. Every act of creation, no matter how small, is an act of transcendence, a refusal to let pain have the final word. And so, the true measure of a masterpiece is not that it was born of suffering, but that it turned suffering into something eternal. It is the transformation of wounds into worlds, scars into symbols, torment into testimony. That is why the works we cherish most feel alive. They carry within them the proof that pain can be endured, reshaped, and transcended. In that transcendence lies the most profound triumph of the human spirit, not the absence of suffering, but its transformation into beauty. Conclusion: the price of beauty. We return at the end to the paradox we began with. Every masterpiece, every timeless work of art, every symphony or canvas or poem that stirs the soul carries within it the shadow of suffering. To consume beauty is, in a sense, to consume the pain of another human being. Their torment becomes our inspiration. Their wounds become our inheritance. From the rituals of ancient civilizations to the tortured genius of history, from the psychological mechanics of pain to the exploitation of suffering by society, one truth echoes across time. Comfort does not create. Pain does. What we call genius is often nothing more than the ability to survive agony long enough to transform it into form, to take the unbearable and make it bearable, not for oneself, but for others. And yet this truth is not simple, for it comes with a price. Every painting we revere may have cost its creator their sanity. Every piece of music that lifts us may have been written through despair. Every philosophy that reshapes our understanding of existence may have been carved from anguish so deep it nearly silenced its thinker. Beauty is not free, it is purchased through suffering, but perhaps that is precisely why it matters. Art does not endure because it is pleasant. It endures because it reveals what is real. Pain, stripped of disguise, confronted with courage, becomes the most authentic expression of what it means to be human. And when it is given form, when it becomes a poem, a painting, a melody, it transforms not only the artist, but all who encounter it. So we are left with a haunting question. If pain is the birthplace of art, should we fear it, or should we embrace it? Should we curse it, or should we see within it the possibility of transcendence? Perhaps the answer is not one or the other, but both. For pain is a destroyer, but it is also a teacher. It humbles, but it also awakens. It wounds, but it also reveals. And so we return to the beginning with a final truth. Masterpieces are not born from pain alone. They are born from the courage to give pain a voice, to let it speak in color, in sound, in words. They are born from those who refuse to let their suffering vanish into silence. This is the price of beauty, and it is also its power.